Hey, what's good, guys? Webinar number 3 in our Special Operations Veteran Healthcare webinar series is upon us. As usual, huge shout out to all our sponsors for everything that they do. I'm going to say it again, it won't be the last time. Zoom webinars are expensive. And thank God for these guys for stepping up and putting out the dough for us to be able to give you guys all this great information. Secondary post-traumatic stress. Man, that's even spicy for me to get near. Reading the book Arsenal of Hope by Jen Satterly, our guest this evening, reading more about it, digging into it. Personally seen the wake of destruction I left behind in 2 separate failed marriages. Growing up in a household where my father was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress, seeing what that toll takes on another human being, as in my mother, and watching what she had to go through, it's kind of brought it full circle. Like I said, it was hard to go through the book Arsenal of Hope, which I definitely recommend everybody to read, mostly because I had to confront a lot of past demons in my own life where I acted so inappropriately, and at least with the information that we're getting now, the easy button was the old PTSD swipe. But just like our last host, Chris Free, who spoke at Jen Satterly's organization's event this past weekend, there are more things at play than just the mental aspect of PTSD, and that goes for our spouses and family members as well. Okay, the conversation is always focused on the operator, and maybe that has its place, but I think we're well beyond that in our understanding of how our mental health works. And if we don't have a strong home life, then it's gonna come out at some point, and it may not be now, may not be tomorrow, may not be 6 months, but at some point it's gonna come up. And generally, it's going to cause some issues. So the focus of this webinar is to really dial it in and expose our operators to what secondary post-traumatic stress is, but more importantly is to arm our spouses, our brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, everybody that we interact with, to give them some of the tools to make it through dealing with the after effects of someone having significant trauma around them. You guys should really check out All Secure Foundation. That's the nonprofit that Jen and her husband Tom created and now run. They do exactly what we're talking about in this webinar. They have targeted the couples, they have targeted the families, and although they do offer services to single members and veterans, the focus is really a holistic one. And it has been so effective. I am very, very, very inspired by the both of them. If there was a nonprofit that I would like to run, I would just copy what they have. It is fantastic. I can't say enough about the guests we're having tonight. Pure of heart, great intentions, very, very smart. For her to be such an effective leader within the veteran healthcare space and not be a veteran herself shows what kind of person this is. The fact that she's recognized and targeted spouses and the family members of the members, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. With no further ado, I would like to welcome Miss Jen Satterly. I'll stop talking. Jen, what's up?
What's up? Thank you for having me. I'm so glad that you are doing this webinar on secondary PTS. I'm surprised often. Tom and I go to special operation bases all over the United States, and just the last 2 we went to, one in January, one in February, we asked one Air Force, one big Army, how many people have heard of secondary PTS? And quite honestly, we usually get maybe 2 to 3 hands in the entire audience that's actually even heard of it. So backing up a little bit on what secondary PTS is. So when We have a war fighter. We're involved in a relationship with them. They deploy, they go off to war. And sometimes it's not even war where they get complex PTS. It could come from very intense training. We know that people get killed and injured in training as well. So some people might develop complex PTS. They might have had it from early childhood trauma as well. We know that in America, at least in special operations, 1 in 4 men will have come from a house with extreme abuse, and 1 in 5 will have come from, will have been sexually molested as children. So we know that there's a lot of trauma going into special operations, and trauma looks for trauma often. And I know I raised my hand. I was an abused child. I was sexually raped, etc. A long list of things. And so when I met Tom, it was like my trauma was attracted to his trauma. But not only did I have my trauma, but I ended up getting a little bit more trauma from Tom, from his complex PTS from being in the military for 25 years. Tom spent 20 years in Delta Force. He was involved in the Battle of Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down, the capture of Saddam Hussein, et cetera, et cetera. And war absolutely took a toll on him. I was not with Tom when he was in service. I'm a veteran spouse, so I met him about 8 months after he retired out of service. And really the best way that Tom and I like to describe secondary PTS is, and I think the spouses get this immediately, is eggshell syndrome. So when your warfighter comes back and you don't know how to read the temperature of the room because it constantly is changing. So if I say this, is he going to get angry? If I say this, is he going to isolate? If I say this, God forbid, is he going to start drinking or leave me, or God forbid, do something worse? It might be something as simple as cleaning the whole house and you leave, some socks on the stairs, and that could set him off. Or the way the kids are behaving or playing loudly, that could set them off. So you're constantly trying to monitor your life, your reactions, monitor the home. And so you start living your life a little bit differently. You're not your authentic self anymore because you're constantly trying to adjust yourself, your mood, your talk, your life, essentially, in order to keep the peace, or in order to keep the relationship in a good space. So what that generally looks like for spouses is anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and a long list of things. And it kind of looks a little bit like PTS. A lot of spouses will say, I don't have that anger and rage, or I might be pretty calm and cool, and then all of a sudden I'll have that same kind of rage. So secondary and complex PTS can look the same and they can look very different. But I guess the main point to know is the spouses will say, I never went off to war. How could I have PTS? Or I've never seen a traumatic incident. How could I have PTS? And it's the effect that PTS has on you, secondary, and how it disrupts the whole home, not only your life, but the children's lives as well. Do you want me to keep going into a little bit of my background, or?
Yeah, I definitely think we'll start with that.
Okay, cool. So I met Tom in 2013, and at that time I was in commercial film and photography, graphic design. So I was 38 years old. I spent my entire adult life way over here, like way, way, way over here in the creative arts space. So my dad was U.S. Air Force, but he was out before I was born. My brother left when I was about 15 for the Air Force, took off, and didn't really see him much. He just moved back to St. Louis now, and he's 58. So didn't see much of him in his career. So I knew very little about military, and I was actually invited to shoot a commercial for a former Delta Force guy who was doing his business, and he had a contracting firm as well. So while I was shooting this commercial over here, I kept looking at Navy SEAL training over there. And during our breaks over here, I'd say, can I go see what's happening over there? And luckily I got a little bit of a peek under that curtain. And then what I saw, I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is crazy. This is how these guys practice. This looks like a film set. It's, helicopters and, all the big things that were happening. So I asked, are there photographers on site? Are people filming this? And they said no. And I said, aren't there filmmakers? Or I've seen that before, combat camera. And they said, that's typically for overseas. So I positioned to the Delta Force guy. I said, hey, can I go on your next one of these and film it? At that time, I had worked with a bunch of sports people, Ironman competitors, St. Louis Cardinals, and they are so specific about reviewing their own footage. And I thought, my gosh, special operations should do this. So that's how I kind of wormed my way and worked my way into about a 3.5 year contract with Navy SEALs, Green Berets, and Army Rangers, a little bit with Air Force PJs. So I would be with the teams as soon as they landed. I would film them literally coming off the plane, setting up their JTAC, follow them through their intel cycles, and then in bed with them on all mission points until they left. So that could be 7 or 8 days, it could be 10 days, it could be 30 days. During that time, I got to know the guys really well. I was most often the only female on contract. I became a little bit of a den mom. People started seeing that Tom started to change. We developed a relationship. He lost 30 pounds. You know, he started acting different. People were joke like, oh my God, Tom has teeth. Like, we knew he had him when he was angry, but he's actually smiling. He's sleeping, things like that. So the guys started asking, like, what's he doing? How's he getting better? And the other side of what I saw was just a deep unwellness and a deep sadness that nobody was talking about and that nobody was really kind of scratching that surface. But for some reason, I had gained trust. And so the guys one-on-one would start talking to me. And what I started to realize is I wasn't hearing combat stories. Very, very, very seldomly would I hear about combat. But what I was hearing more and more about was, oh my God, I'm going to get divorced again. And I'm like 28 years old and I'm on my second divorce. Or I don't know how to be a dad. Like, I have no idea how to come home and I've got these kids and I don't know what to do with them. Or, you know, I'm the monster that I'm trying to protect my family from and I've become that person now. Like, how do I shut the anger off? I don't know how to flip that switch. And so in 2016, basically, I just started asking all the guys when I would set the camera down, like, how can I help? Like, what can I do? How can I help you come home? And people are like, I've got the nutrition piece. I've actually got the war piece. I'm good at war. Like, I'm way comfortable overseas. Help me be a better husband. Help me be a better father. And if you can help me do those things, I think I've got it. And so in 16, we started All Secure Foundation, became official in 17. We started programming in 19 for couples to heal from secondary PTS. And like you said, just this past weekend, we've finished about a 200-person special operations retreat. That's me in a nutshell.
Wow. Yeah, it's quite a bit. It's pretty cool you got to do that job too, because you get a front row seat to like movie stuff. That's really surprising to hear you say though, like the heaviness of it. I wasn't expecting that you could like pick up on that vibe. What when you started seeing, I guess, changes with Tom, like living with it, I guess, what was it like before you decided to make a decision to be like, hey, how can I help? And then what were those initial like blocks that you used?
Yeah, you know, when I met Tom, he fit all the like typical, you know, here's the stereotypical operator thing, like very charming, very charismatic, very, very serious when it came to his work, was very dedicated, loved his career as an operator, loved going to war. That was his safe place. Quite honestly, that was his happy place. That's where he felt like he was called to do that. That's his life mission, warfighter. Um, when he was at home, he was deeply insecure. He drank. At that time, I thought he was an alcoholic. We've come to realize he was problem drinking, self-medicating. He, you know, would go from, I would say, like anger to rage, but the anger part was so short that it was just rage all the time. And it would be over the craziest things to me. Like, it would literally be over, you left a cup in the sink, and then there would be this, you know, 2 hour explosion of why I couldn't move it into the dishwasher. And it's like, I can't believe that, you know, this thing is causing this huge of a reaction. He slept probably 3 hours at a time a night, maybe getting 4 hours total. He was on 16 different pills from the VA. He, like I said, he was self-medicating with alcohol all the time. He thought he was doing okay because he didn't drink during the day. He's like, I don't drink until evening, so I'm all right. I'm functioning. I'm all right at work. But he wasn't okay at work. He was completely making mistakes on contracts. He had brain fog all the time where he would forget things. He just was not sharp. And so I would have this Jekyll and Hyde Tom. When we were on contract, we were in front of the guys. He was at work. He was in control. He was completely calm. Like the chaos is where he would settle. And in fact, I would have some of his friends tell me who were, in combat with him, oh, Tom was a great CSM. I loved him because, Iraq shit would be going down. It would be awful, but Tom's voice on the radio was always so calm. It was always just this very, calming presence. And that's because the chaos is where he thrived. And even at home, something would be really bad that would happen. Like we had a hatchback car at the time, and I drove it into the garage with the top up, and the entire thing shattered. And I thought, oh my God, like this is going to cause World War III. He's going to freak out. He's on a contract right now in Florida. Now I've got to disrupt this military exercise. And he was like, it's fine. Accidents happen. No big deal. Yet the cup in the sink is what starts World War III. So, as a girlfriend turned spouse, you don't know what your day to day is going to be like. You don't even know what your minute to minute is going to be like. And so it creates a lot of this depression and anxiety. And what I started to see in working was the same types of behavior. I probably spent about 80 or 85% of the time with SEAL teams. So I would notice these guys that would spend an iteration with us deploy, 7 months later, they're back with us training again to deploy. So I would see some of these teams over the course of the years, 3 or 4 times. And I would see a teammate at the beginning, like peppy and excited and the fist pumps and all of that kind of stuff. And we're going to go get some, to after the fourth deployment, like, oh my God, you look 45. I could see it on your face. I could see the heaviness. I could see the grief. And in fact, we had a team come back, and I said, I know you guys lost 4 guys on your last deployment, and you could see it. I could see it on all of them, but nobody was talking about it. So I started talking about it, never to embarrass, never to do like, hey, I'm in kumbaya in front of everyone. That's not going to work. But in those one-on-one moments, I would say, how are you dealing? How are you coping? How are you grieving? And they would all say the same thing to me is, there's no time for that. I don't have time for that shit. I'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it when I'm out. I'll deal with it after this or that. And so I was lucky enough that they trusted me enough to really give me those insights so that I could create the All Secure Foundation, which is what was needed. If they were bullshitting me, I wouldn't have gotten there. But the incredible thing about operators is they can be extremely vulnerable when they have the opportunity, incredibly intelligent, resilient, all of these incredible qualities. And so when they would come to me and say, hey, how do I stop this? It's like, they just wanted this. They just wanted the training manual. Give me the book. Tell me how to stop that. I'm great. I'm good at instruction. Just give me the tactics. And so that's what we want to do at All Secure. You're not broken. You're not unfixable. PTS is an injury that you can heal from. We educate on that. This is something you can get over. And by the way, if you wait until the shit is over or until you get out, it's going to get worse, like way worse, and not better with time. And that's true for your family too. It will be worse for your spouse, and it'll be worse for your children if you don't address it and you don't heal from it. We can't send a war fighter to go get help and then put him right back into a home with a spouse who's like, oh, good for you. I'm glad you're all healed now. Like the last 20 years of me with the kids and all of this, like, where's mine? So it was really critical for me to not only hear the war fighter, but everyone who was impacted by war.
Yeah, it's 2024. I think people can get over themselves and have the conversations, and there's enough data that is driving this, like physiologically, things that are happening to your brain with traumatic brain injuries or all these other things there is data behind it. So it's not just like frou-frou, oh, talk to a psych and worry about this and that. It's like, no, 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 no. Like this is more important. And just like you said, ooh, man, getting out of the military, yeah, you don't want to be dealing with that stuff when you get out. The transition is hard enough. And there, yeah, the transition is hard enough. There's a lot of different things that are happening to complicate it with going through this PTSD, PTS, putting your family through it too. Uh, it's quite a bit. I found I well, when I was reading the Arsenal of Hope and I read about the cup thing, and yeah, it struck close to home for me because I do the same thing. And my spouse now, she wasn't with me when I was in the military. And when I act certain ways, she's just like, "What is wrong with you? Like, what is the deal?" And it's definitely a control issue. And she even said control before to me. We were talking about this earlier, but it was like so strange that I didn't understand it until I read your book, until I looked into not secondary post-traumatic stress, but the fact that that behavior of the control of like, no, you didn't fill the dishwasher correctly. She's
Yeah.
my like ADHD raccoon putting away in the dishwasher, and I'm just like, no, I can't deal with it. But it at least now I'm recognizing it, I see it, and I like it's more of a laugh to be like, dude, get over yourself, let it go. Whereas what it would have been before, man, like that would have been it. That would have been like the start of it. That's just like downhill. Here we go.
Here we go.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, yeah, not good. There was two other things I wrote down that I think operators are good at like hiding their like perfect hiders are it's almost the difference between functioning and non-functioning. When I talk about like a non-functioning alcoholic and a functioning alcoholic, like the functioning one is way more scary because they're doing life, you know what I mean? And maybe don't use the word alcoholic, but functioning like human being when you're not on the inside. Um, you can do that for a while, but it's a very temporary solution. Temporary as in like, man, that can be 5, 6 years, 10 years, but it catches up to you and it ages you. It really does. It'll age your soul too.
Oh, 100%.
When I think it's good, we'll highlight maybe some more of the specific things that spouses could see in partners when they come home. I think we can
For
go
sure.
there maybe.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So, you know, what we often hear spouses say is, I don't want my husband just to come back. I want all of him to come back, all the pieces. And people generally see, I'm a research person. I love research. I love numbers. I love the science behind things. I went and got certified as a health coach just to understand biology and PTS, not to be a health coach. But I love numbers. I love stats, and I love to understand how these things break down. And so, after typically for US soldiers at least, we know after the third or fourth deployment that we start seeing some significant changes. Not true for everyone. And I speak in generality. So people might say, my gosh, it was really bad for me on my first deployment and everything happened then, or I was fine until my seventh. But typically what we see is after the third or fourth deployment, there's a change, there's a shift. And not only can we look at science, but I've talked to hundreds of war fighters. And what is that shift and what is happening? Well, when you go to the first deployment, typically it's, hey, you're gung ho, you want to test your mettle, you've done all of this training, you want to get some, you're with your boys, there's an excitement to it. Like Tom said, he said he used to go into the team rooms on those first couple deployments, everybody's high fiving, everybody's good to go. And he said around the third or fourth deployment, the room's quiet. And no longer are people high fiving, people are drinking and they're just packing their shit up because they're like, it's my number. This is the one. Um, would I ever not go? No, these are my boys. These are my brothers. So I'm going to go. But in the back of my mind, I don't know if I'm coming back. And I think what's really hard for civilians or sometimes even spouses to understand is if you really, really like quietly sit there and try to put yourself in that situation of, I might not come back home. And this is my job. This is my duty. In fact, I love it. But the reality is, I might not live to see my 30th or 40th birthday. The consequence system is not the same for me as it is for my wife. The consequence system is not the same for me as the accountant. If I want to drink or cheat or do whatever I want to do, I'm going to do it because I'm not going to see 40. So there won't be a long-term consequence for me. So we see multiple things happen: cultural breakdown, spiritual breakdown, physical breakdown, because there's probably been an injury by third or fourth deployment. So you're in physical pain and you might be trying to cope that. I mean, just the physical pain enough might be enough for you to start taking pills, prescriptions, drinking to hide it. So when that spouse, when that warfighter comes home and the spouse is like, this is not the guy I had when he was going through the qualification course, or who he was pre-military. The truth of the matter is you will never get that man back. Once you enter the battlefield, you change forever, period. But the thing to remember is you also change for the better. You develop resiliency, anti-fragility. You're a stronger, smarter, better person for it as well. The darkness can eat you up, though. Absolutely, 100%. One thing that we just dealt with a lot over the weekend was moral injury. Of, you know, for some people, it's thou shalt not kill, and that's in their head, and I'm going to hell anyways. There's no sense of consequence for me. But really, the science behind it is this. If there's a traumatic thing that happens in combat, if there was something, a loss of life, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is for that person, where they had a complex traumatic situation, when they come back home, their body is doing one thing: fight, fight, freeze. It's saying, I'm not safe. This house isn't safe. This person isn't safe, constantly. That vigilance never stops. So when Tom freaked out about a cup in the sink, it had nothing to do with the cup in the sink. It had nothing to do that I didn't put it in the dishwasher correctly or stack it correctly. His mind, and the mind of somebody who has severe complex post-traumatic stress, especially in a war zone, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. That's constantly in the back of his head. It's a subconscious thought. He doesn't walk around our house, you know, in Missouri saying, you know, I'm going to be attacked, but his brain doesn't know the difference. So when his brain sees chaos and disorder, whatever that looks like to him, and that might be a sock on the floor, it might be a cup in the sink, it's, you're going to respond exactly like you did in training, exactly, which is to respond very, very quickly, very, very violently, aggressively, and you're going to fix it now, because I'm going to get order, I'm going to get safety, I'm going to get security. And when that's all fine, then I'm going to take the room temperature, then I'm going to see. So that's why a lot of times the spouses are like, it's crazy because it's this explosion. And then after that initial, you know, the system has to settle back down. And when that system settles, then it's, hey, you want to get something to eat? And the spouse is like, are you kidding me? Like, you just unleashed hell on me. And now you're like, yeah, what, you want to go get a bite? It's like, no, I don't want to get a bite. Now I'm shooken up. Now I'm freaked out because I did all these other things today, and that's the thing that set you off. But the
Right.
brain doesn't know the difference. It just doesn't, between perceived chaos and real chaos. So that's why we see the change. That's the need is safety and security, and the response is flight, flight, or freeze. And the thing that you have to remember too is the training for you guys, like special operations training. I do feel so lucky as a spouse that I got to see under the curtain for almost 4 years, that I was in helicopters doing all of these things, because it was, from my perspective, being on the outside watching, it's the hardest freaking job I've ever seen anyone do, period. And I didn't even go overseas, but it literally is the hardest job I've seen anyone do. And I have so much compassion for the grief and the hard. I have compassion for the culture, even, like, because I understand why it exists. You know, in my book, I talk about Tom early in our relationship. There's an infidelity issue that happened. And I remember having a friend ask me, like, how did you get over it so quickly? And I said, I think that pain will always be with me. But here's the deal. I spent 3.5 years working alongside guys that was part of the culture. It was accepted. It was encouraged. It was promoted even. And not every single guy cheated. And I don't want wives being like, oh my God, you know, looking to the left or right, because that's not the case. But where my husband was, the unit he was in had a 98% divorce rate, 98%. So the cheating, that type of rock star lifestyle, was very normal to him. And when I even asked him, why did you do it? He said, Jen, I don't know. I didn't even like her. And then he sat there for a minute and he said, this answer you're not going to like. And I said, but it's honest. And he said, yes. And he said, habit. It was habit. And so until he started leaving that culture behind until he started saying, you know what, I'm going to live to 50 or 60. I am going to have to face consequences. And I don't want the family that I live with every day to live with a monster. I want them to live with a good version of Tom, not Crawler, not the guy built for war, not the guy rewarded and given medals for violence, but the guy who was from Indiana who liked to fish and hang out with his friends. And you can come back to that. I mean, Tom isn't that guy, but I don't want him to be that guy. I mean, he's an incredible war fighter. He's a hero to me. He's so resilient, strong, brave, all of those things. And war forged him into a different man. He had to drop his demons, and he has. But that was not that's been a 10-year process for Tom, and probably a legitimate 5-year process for me to heal from secondary.
Wow. What a mature outlook on I'm sure living through it was not like as clean as the way that you can speak about it, but wow, the reflection and your patience and your maturity to look at it all that way is, I was saying before, a lot of these people that work in these nonprofit spaces or psychedelics and stuff, they're like angels. So I truly believe like Tom definitely lucked down. You're in the right place for All Secure Foundation to push this message because it really resonates. Um, with that like Crawler piece. So Crawler was like
Oh,
not
his
the
call
alter
sign.
ego, but
Yeah.
yeah, his color sign overseas. And then when he was the angry dude, that was the name that you gave him. And that was just like an easy way for him to be reminded, hey man, things are a little bit getting out of control. Um, I see my psych was calling it like a dark passenger. I think we were talking about it earlier as well, but that was I've had issues with alcohol, with substances, and all sorts of stuff, depression, etc. And that dark passenger of like the combat dude of Crawler, she put it like he can drive, but he can't drive all the time. Like you gotta like he's got to be in the back seat a bunch. And I look almost like I was laughing because I'm like, it's so weird. Like you mean like multiple personality, dude? Like what are you saying to me? And she was like, yeah, kinda. Like that person is a part of you, and that's like built into you. So instead of this resistance to it, it's like, can you accept that and just have them go to their place, the back seat? Well, people are gonna be like, this guy's insane.
Oh,
So,
so true though. But everybody has different personalities because you are totally different in the team room than you are at your parents' house, that you are at church, than you are. We all wear different hats. We all do.
mm, that makes me feel a lot less crazy. Thank you. Um, for that situation where the blowout happens with the cup thing and it's the fight or flight, big violence of action, and now things are settled, what would your recommendation be to spouses during that?
De-escalation is the number one thing that we're asked for at All Secure is what do I do in those rage-filled moments? They're terrifying. And it depends on the spouse. It really does. It depends. Obviously, if there's physical violence involved, which is very common in our community, the first thing is safety. So to any spouse who's like legitimately does fear for their life, and a lot of spouses will say that that sounds crazy, and I will say a Delta Force operator shot and killed his wife last year. So 2 years ago, a Green Beret, last year, a Ranger. So it happens. It's rare, but I just want to take that very seriously, and I always start a conversation with that. If you feel unsafe, if you feel like you're in danger, that's the first step, is to get safe. Period. So de-escalation. People are like, oh my gosh, you get an operator who's enraged, and the last thing you want to do is hit the nuclear button and send him off to another place. So everybody does know their spouse better. De-escalation, I think, is done best when you work with a coach or a therapist and they get to know you. They get to know your negative cycle. How are you guys fighting? How is it showing up? What's the deeper why under the why, so that you have the awareness piece. This is why we're fighting. This is what's triggering us. This is what's constantly sending us into this battleground. But what is the why under the why? So for Tom, it was like we kept fighting about the cup in the sink, but until we said, okay, it's not the cup in the sink. I feel that the house is disorderly. I feel like it's chaotic. And, here are some things that would help me at home feel better. And I could do the same thing as a spouse. Okay, I hear you. I'm not your soldier. I'm not somebody in your command team. This is how I would like you to talk to me in these situations. So Tom and I have to have those conversations. Never, ever, ever when we're triggered. Never when it's loud. We can only have those conversations in really calm and quiet time. So you talked about psychedelics earlier. Some people will, and I don't know how it is there, but in the States, psilocybin, MDMA, marijuana have been used to kind of help people take themselves out of the situation and work through some really difficult things. People do it through traditional cognitive behavioral therapy and coaching. For Tom and I, that's what we had to do. We were not in the place where he and I could figure out de-escalation, just the two of us. So we worked with a licensed clinical social worker. We hired her at All Secure. She's our main lead therapist, to figure out how to de-escalate. But I will tell you, for everyone, I don't care who you are, getting away from the situation and taking a pause is always a good step, number one, no matter what de-escalation looks like for you. So the awareness of, we are on the same team. We are teammates. We are fighting the problem, not each other. That has to be in your mindset all the time, number one. And Tom and I I literally had a Post-it note on our mirror for a long time. You and me against PTS, like we fight together, things like that. And once Tom started to realize, like, oh, wait, this is my forever battle buddy. Like, this is my forever teammate. It's her and me against PTS, not against each other. We would remind each other of that in those times. Like, hey, like our shorthand language is get back to good. So that's what we say, and we know what we mean. Hey, I'm just trying to get back to good. That means let's pause. We're both getting elevated. And quite often we're saying the same thing, but not using the same language. Or we're just not hearing each other. So embrace the pause, number one. And we'll literally use like the therapist language that we used to laugh through, quite honestly. Or Tom would be like, this shit doesn't work. I'm like, because you're not doing it. Or we would do the, I'm telling Stacy, and I'm like, I'm telling Stacy, it's not easy to figure out your rules of engagement plan. Because I mean, you have all of these books to go to war, all of these warfare, all of these rules of engagement, and then people don't have that at home. And then if you don't have that, things just go crazy. You hit the nuclear option all the time because you want to win. And when you want to win, the relationship loses 100%. So that was another little post-it. When I'm trying to win, the relationship loses. It's all these like therapy talk that quite honestly, we kind of giggle through, but it's true.
Yeah.
So, for us, it's like, hey, we got to get back to good. And that means generally I'm going for a walk, or he's going for a walk, or he's going to go downstairs and punch some bags, or I'm going to go play with the dogs, whatever. We know until both of us feel comfortable coming back together where we're not elevated and spiked, that could be 10 minutes. Tom could come around the corner and I could see it in his face. His jaw's relaxed now. He's not breathing. So, his chest isn't puffed, and he'll come around the corner and he'll go, I don't know what that was. Sorry. And right then I know, I'm like, are we going to get back to good? And he's like, let's get back to good. And so we could sit down and at those times have a talk. Sometimes it's, Jen, I'm still really pissed. Like I can't talk about this right now. And I'll say, okay, but we're still going to talk about it, right? Yep. And I respect him in that manner now. Okay. But within 24 hours, we're going to get back to good. We're going to get back to talk about this. So you have to understand, and one really great trip for everybody is the Gman Institute. So if you go to the Gman Institute, they have free courses, free programs for couples, free de-escalation. It's emotionally focused therapy. It's the therapy that we use at All Secure. And so they have plans. How do you de-escalate? How do you get back to good? How do you find your safe space? And it's so unique to each couple that I wish I had this like broad answer, but embracing the pause is so critical, especially let your operators fight, flight, or freeze, that parasympathetic, sympathetic system calm down. Because when you are elevated and you're enraged, you don't hear, you don't see, and you just want to win. So you've got to let that first settle, let the biological system settle, and then you can talk about what you need to talk about, but not in that space.
Yeah, I'm guilty as charged with that. I think that's, man, it's just like patience. It's not worth it. It's very, very, very hard to do, but wow, it's so correct that like you need to do that, to to not re-engage. It's like the eating junk food. You want to engage though. You're just like, yes, like I want to fight.
No.
The rowing together and not rowing apart, a part of the relationship, is something that I found was effective for my language. Just like instead of it, a lot of the times it feels like you're pulling apart, and it's a lot more effective when you guys are pulling in the same direction. Things work a lot better. Life's way easier. And I love the term your forever battle buddy, which is you don't think about it at all, but like, no, 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 no. Like that is your person. Like you're with them for a long, long time. So you don't we don't put it in the frame that it should be the respect of like, yeah, it is your forever battle buddy. So I like that term. There was a question, how do you de-escalate as a fixer or someone that wants to help? I don't know if
Yeah.
that's
Well,
I
yeah.
don't
So there's typically like three types of relationship cycles. And the most common 80% of people are pursuer withdrawer. So that means one person is going to keep coming at the person. We're going to finish this conversation. We're going to finish this fight. And that person is trying to seek for security quickly. So they're like, hey, this relationship is very, very important to me. And now we're off balance. We're fighting. So that pursuer is going to say, we're going to finish this right now because I don't feel safe until I know you're good and I'm good. The withdrawer is going to say, whoa, 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 whoa. This is elevated. This is escalated. I'm going to physically walk out of the room. I'm going to pick up a phone and call. I'm going to do whatever I can to avoid you because this escalation is scary to me. I feel unsafe in this situation. So until I feel safe, I don't want to have a conversation. But that pursuer is going to feel more uncomfortable now. Wait, why are you walking away from me? Why are you leaving the room? Why are you calling someone? That person's looking for safety and security, and this person's looking for safety and security. They're just doing it in a very different way. Then you have withdrawer. So both people are going to leave the room. And then you have the pursuer. So there's different types of, like 80% are going to fall into that first category. So you have to know, first of all, what type you are. Gottman can kind of help with this situation as well. If you're a fixer, you have to realize I understand your intention, right? The intention is to get back to good and you want to fix it, but you have to, you can't fix things for everybody. And quite often your partner doesn't want you to fix things. Quite often the partner just wants to be heard and seen. So if you are a fixer, you might say something like this: are you wanting my help in this situation, or do you just need a vent? Or are you looking for a solution, or do you just need to talk? Because that is fixing it for some people. But you got to let people make their own mistakes, and you've got to let them find their own roadmap most often, or they won't get there. So I appreciate the fixer. My husband's one, but yeah, you've got to find safety, security for both.
Okay, I think I'm gonna start jumping in with some
Yeah,
questions as
perfect.
well. I know I want to respectfully your time, an hour. If there are more questions, I know Jen said she would be willing to stay for a little bit. Um, Before I actually answer any more questions, I think it would be good to go over some treatment modalities so we can fit it in that like, hey, what are some solutions that if your spouse is like you are the one trying to figure out and guide, because it's important we talk about this too, that it's usually a spouse that is pushing the member to get the treatment. It's not actually the member being like, oh, I'm time to fix myself. It's like a spouse in a crisis saying, I need help for X.
100%. You just had Dr. Free on, who wrote Operator Syndrome, and it's 13 years before an operator will ask for help typically. That's not good. I mean, that's not a good number. That means you're living in pain for 13 years, and your family's probably living in pain for 13 years. So yes, most often, even at All Secure Foundation, the spouse can come into our programming, even if the active duty or veteran member does not. Because we do know that the spouse is typically the one that will bring the service member into the fold. You know, it can be really difficult. Each person in the relationship has to be willing. I think willingness is the most important thing. People will talk about awareness, but willingness. Life's hard. Healing from war is hard. It takes years, and there's many modalities, but long as you're willing and open to try new things, you can get to the other side of this injury. And there's many, many, many different modalities of healing. My husband has done all of them, but guess what? I did them all alongside of him. So not only did Tom, the only thing I didn't do was transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is shock therapy. I didn't need it. He had very severe depression at the time, but he had 36 appointments and I was at 34 of them. So I always went to his treatments with him. Quite frankly, probably wouldn't have gone in the early days if I wasn't getting him to go. Transcendental meditation, supplementation's huge, 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 huge. He was on 16 different pills when I met him. He was a zombie. He was not sleeping, not eating, everything. Getting off those pills, taking supplements that you get like on Amazon, nothing expensive or crazy. Getting blood panels. His testosterone level was 3, not 300, 3. So basically, I'm like, you're a 90-year-old woman. Like, this is crazy. So it affected his libido, everything, his energy level. So get your labs done, get a brain scan. If you have traumatic brain injury, your chance of suicide is increased exponentially. So a lot of guys will say, I don't know why I have all these suicidal ideations. My life's going pretty great. It's part of the injury. It's part of the brain damage. And so that's something to pay close attention to as well. There are psychedelic treatments. Those are becoming very popular with our operators in the United States. There are different modalities of healing. We talked about Gman, which is emotionally focused therapy. There's anti-fragility training. So there's equine therapy. Some people really love working with horses. So there's a million different things that you can do, a ton of different modalities. I encourage the couples to do them together whenever you can. And if I know, like for psychedelic journeys, a lot of times they don't want the operator and the spouse to go together, but there are spouse specific psychedelic retreats. So I would encourage, if that's interesting to both parties, to do it.
Yeah, I think psychedelics, MDMA is a big one where you do it together because it
Yeah.
calms down your nervous system, so you're not like at each other. And then yeah, I've seen a lot of retreats for spouse specific. So like, yeah, it's kind of good that they go and do their own retreat with other spouses. Um, okay, blood panels and stellate ganglion block. Have
Yes.
you heard about that one? Okay.
Yes. So
It
I did
was
that twice.
on both sides.
I did. I did a double.
Cool.
Yeah, we did that in Chicago about 3.5 years ago. And then just a few months ago, we had a second
Wow.
one and probably honestly didn't even really need it, which was it was a nice surprise. Like, oh, we're better than we thought we were.
Hmm.
The first round was far more effective for us, and we're like, it's kind of cool. We're in a better spot than we thought. So it was actually encouraging the other way.
That's cool that you get to see that kind of feedback from it as well. It
For sure.
shows the efficacy of it. For people that don't know, it's a nerve block that's located in your neck. I won't get into super detail. We're having Dr. Dave Mulvaney. I hope that's his name. Come on
Mulvaney,
in two
got it.
weeks. Yeah. Okay, he's
Yeah.
coming on the webinar in 2 weeks and he's going to talk about it in deep dive a little bit more. But very cool things that are happening within the community for treatment options. Um, I had a question. Oh, for JF, it is the Gottman Institute. Is that correct? That was one of the questions.
Correct. The Gman Institute. And so that's John Gottman. And his webinars are free. There's a ton of information. He's got incredible books. 7 Principles How to Make a Marriage Work is the book that we give out at our retreat from Gottman. Dr. Sue Johnson is the other relationship specialty. She's got like a 90% save rate for divorce. So she's incredible.
Mm. Um, Really random stat that came back to me before I asked this question or point that I wanted to hit on was the percentage of suicides that take place after a fight that happens in a family or with a spouse.
That
I think it's
was
like, I
really
don't know the number, but it's really high, right?
89%.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
89% will happen after an incident in the home. That could be domestic violence, a divorce. It could be something like I had a fight with my child. The child said he, doesn't want anything to do with me anymore. So something that happens, a disruption in the home, 89%. So when people say we want to tackle veteran suicide and they don't want to tackle family issues, they're looking at it completely and utterly wrong.
I agree. I think it's it is the catalyst that kind of pushes it over because operator is so good at suppressing it, and the work is so easy to get lost in and to get to not, that is all, be all and end all is the work. And then real life is like not something that you can check out of. So it comes up on you pretty quickly. Um, with I was gonna ask a question about treatment modalities. I forgot it. Gosh darn it. Okay. I'll just ask this question over here then. How do you deal with the fear of living with someone that could harm you or the family if you have that in the back of your mind?
Oof, that's a tough
Yeah,
one. It's
heavy.
heavy and unfortunately very common. I know there were times in my life, quite honestly, where I became suicidal. I knew that if I left Tom, that that would probably be the end for Tom. At that point in time, where he was at mentally, it probably would have been. Um, at the same time, I was terrified for my children, for myself. I was living in a constant state of fear. I became suicidal during that time. Not that I wanted to take my life, but that I wanted an out. I wanted to figure out how to get out of this pain, out of this crazy life that I was in. And that was a real hand to the head for Tom. It created a lot of change pretty quickly within him when I started to express, like, I can't do this anymore. I've hit, like, the end of the rope is already up there now. Like, I've fallen from the end of the rope. And we had to talk about that fear of living with someone who can hurt you. And quite often, operators, in those moments of rage and those moments of that blindness, domestic violence is more common than people like to admit. In fact, in this community, it's very rarely admitted, even though it's pretty prevalent. I would say always safety's first. And I think that the warfighter needs to understand that it's not that your family doesn't love you or care about you. It's that your training and your specialty is so specific and so good, and you're so good at it, and you're so highly trained that sometimes if you're not in a space where you're safe for your family, you don't need to get divorced, you don't need to separate, but you might need physical space while you heal. And that sounds weird, but we've encouraged people. Guys have gotten apartments in town. They've stayed with a bro or a friend during that time in order to de-escalate to where the family feels safe, because it's really critical, especially for children. They pick up everything, believe me, that they know that mom and dad are safe. So that conversation needs to happen. If you don't feel safe having that with your spouse, a lot of people don't. The most common thing we hear about from a spouse is, I'm afraid of you, but I'm not afraid of you. So I'm afraid to talk to you even. You might need to do that by connecting with a therapist and coach and saying, I need to have this really difficult conversation with my warfighter. But you need to have that conversation. It needs to happen.
And I think there's an onus to, I know people can keep stuff really private, which is something you talked about in your book. Um, but having these kind of conversations about post-secondary or secondary post-traumatic stress disorder and the effects of it, reading that book, reading it as the operator, as the like offender, I guess. I don't know, like it hearing you speak of that right now, it like hurts because you don't it's so easy to disregard all of that and not think about it because it's the nasty, hard things to deal with. But it when it's in your face, it's so important, and you realize that like you are really affecting someone else, and you may be grabbing and trying to hold on as hard as you can, but it's not, that isn't the solution at that point either. Um, do you see a higher suicide rate among women who tried to save their marriages and were affected by their spouse's abuse slash trauma? I don't know if I can, if you want me to reread
We
that.
do, we, what I do know, statistically wise, it's so frustrating and near impossible to get numbers. That's the first thing. So in the United States, they would always say 22 a day, 22 suicides a day. That's not true. It's 44 to 48 a day. We know that to be true. So getting numbers, the Pentagon released that 200 special operations spouses committed suicide in 2021. We know that that number is low and probably not true either. So I'm sorry, in U.S. military, not special operations. So in the military, 200 spouses took their lives due to secondary PTS. So the spouse had complex PTS from war trauma. the spouse directly took her life. That number feels very low to me. Quite often, the U.S. military doesn't count death by opioids or overdoses or death by alcohol.
Mm.
And we know that that's very common. So we know that those numbers are high. So yes, we know that statistically speaking, in special operations, spouses will have a much, much higher rate of suicide, and the children in special operations anywhere between 10 to 17% higher suicide rate than civilian children.
That's terrible.
It's,
That's not okay. What would be your suggestion for possible treatment solutions for children in this situation?
oh, that is my passion project and something that we've been working really hard on. And in fact, in the next probably month and a half, All Secure will be able to take 13-year-olds and up. So we do life coaching, and that's been a big passion project for mine, because what we started to see in the special operations community was a high level of ADHD, learning disabilities, disorders, autism, because of all the chemicals that the operators
Mm.
had. So, all the shots that you get, chemical and toxic exposures. So these kids are being diagnosed with ADHD or these disorders when they haven't even looked at secondary PTS. So we're really passionate about trying to educate as well, because these kids are getting medicines that they don't need because it's really that they're afraid. We just had Dr. Free speak this weekend, and he said one of the kids he was working with kept drawing tombstones. He was 14, and they were terrified and like guns and things. And so they thought, oh my God, this is the next school shooting. They bring in Dr. Free, and he said, why are you drawing like these really dark images? And he's like, my dad's deployed right now. And he's like, it's all I can think about is he's probably going to die today. And so I'm drawing his cemetery. I'm drawing like what his tombstone will look like. Nobody ever asked that kid that question. It was like, oh my gosh, the kid's crazy. He's going to scream. No, this kid every day is trying to process something very, very deep and very, very dark and very, very scary. So we have to help our kids. If there aren't programs in your area, you can reach out specifically to trauma-focused therapist, child therapist, somebody. They don't have to have combat experience, but I would look for someone who has trauma experience working with children, and to definitely look at that if they want to start medicating your kid.
Yeah, it's I amazing to think that it's kind of just like the operator syndrome where you have the three, like the Venn diagram of different things that are
Yeah.
happening, but it just gets the label of PTSD, and it's like, let's maybe treat some of these before we start giving pills, and then we have to go figure out like if they're taking those properly, and if they're not, then what's that doing to their brain, and more and more. Yeah. Um, how to deal with self-destructive tendencies?
Ooh, that's a good one. Self-destructive tendency. So when we used to go to SWIC, the Green Beret Q course, Tom and I would go a few times a year. And when we very first started going, I think maybe 2018, the lieutenant colonel would say, Jen, like have a little slide up there and go through all of the things that our operators can identify and say, like, that's PTS. And I used to do it, and it was like drinking, pills, gambling, affair. Like I would go through the thing, and eventually I was like, Stu, like when I put this up on the wall, they're gonna laugh at me. And he's like, what? I'm like, this looks like every freaking operator, like how are they gonna be able to tell when things get freaking bad, like reckless behavior, adrenaline junkie, like it's part of the job description. It's why you guys look for them. You specifically look for trauma. You specifically look for people who don't need help getting things done. Now I just totally lost the question in my head.
The self-destructive tendencies.
Oh, self-destructive. There we go. So PTS or complex PTS, that trauma is looking to soothe, constantly looking to soothe or to fight, flight, or freeze. So if you're doing something destructive, you're just looking for that safety and security. You're looking to feel something or not feel something. So there's something happening underneath that you're just trying to fill your cup up with all the wrong things. And I don't say that as a judgment statement. I mean, there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that do the exact same thing, whether you're military or not, by the way. When you have PTS, you're trying to fill that cup up because you feel empty. And so people will go to gambling, booze, drugs, women, whatever it is. That reckless behavior is to numb out the crap that you don't want to feel. And the only way to get rid of reckless behavior is to get to the underneath issue and to root it out. And that's not a, there's no pill for that. That's facing your demons and truly facing them, and then getting to work on eradicating them and fixing it. Then that behavior subsides. I know Tom's has. He still wants to get some. He still has that part of him. In fact, the other day he was like, I feel like I need to be violent. Like literally said that. Like, I feel like I'm like, good, great, go do that over there somewhere. You know, get out of your
Oh,
system, another space.
the reckless behavior thing, it's something I don't talk about because it's like embarrassing, but like the stuff I was doing near the end of my career, like even around my buddies at work or supervisors and stuff, like there would be like, what are you doing? And like, and I wouldn't care. It was just like I think I wanted to get caught to
Yep.
then like it could be over. It was so weird. So I could just be like, I could just put the sword down and just be like, I just want to take care of my shit, like be a person, but I never got caught, so I was just continuously doing this insane stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I'm so
Right.
happy
You're right.
I'm
You
not
were
that
probably
person.
trying to look for someone to tap you out because an operator never wants to tap out. But if somebody else can do it for you, that's a way to release a little bit of shame and guilt, because there's so much. You guys attach so much when you leave service. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The shame is a huge one. I think I heard Tom talk about it. Like
Yep.
my buddy called it the shame spiral, and people,
Yep.
it's the hardest thing to get into. It's like small tornado turns into the big F5 guy where it's just like, I'm a bad person and this and that and this and that, and you're so far down, and it's like you are in control of all of these things right now, of how you want to think about this situation. Um, okay. As the spouse of a U.S. SOF veteran who has been a battle buddy for 12 years, at what point do you know you have to stop advocating and fighting for your marriage?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Only you know that.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to know when your point of I'm done is. And I think that generally comes, what I hear most of is when willingness stops. So when your partner says, I know I have to change, I know things need to be different, but I'm not willing to do a damn thing about it. This is the life I'm going to live in. This is the shit I'm going to sit in, and you're going to sit in it with me. I don't know what you want to do with that, but I don't think that, I mean, to each his own. But you've got a partner who says, this shit sucks. It's hard. I'm failing, but I want to try. I want to get better. Show me, help me, be there with me. Sorry I screwed up. Shit, sorry I screwed up. But I'm trying, I'm trying, I'm trying. That's a totally different situation. When there's willingness, when there's accountability, when there's responsibility, and there's injury, that's a different situation. When there's injury and no willingness and no accountability and no responsibility. Um, so yeah, I mean, that's a very, very personal question, but I think, and here's the other part. If 12 to 14 years is the highest rate for divorce, statistically, we know that it's about 85% of divorces happen in years 12 to 14. If that's the point where people hit their little dip, they hit that valley, and that's where they want to bounce, because you need a different spouse when you're 21, 41, and 61. The trick is to pick the same person each turn. So if you hit one of those turns and you guys aren't growing in the same direction, you're growing apart, you have no common interest anymore, there's no love and there's no willingness, that's where people will quit and that bounce. But what they have to remember is people can have a very beautiful upswing. So it's, am I in a valley, or am I in a place where there's love loss? And nobody knows that but themselves.
Yeah, we're really putting you on the spot. They're good questions and they're really good answers.
Great questions.
Um, we have Tammy here saying, what information or advice would you give to military members and their partners who maybe haven't been exposed to traumatic incidences yet, but are in a field where they might, for instance, the spouses of new members?
Mhm. You know what is so incredibly powerful is knowledge. It is so good to arm yourself with what could be coming down the road. So I would recommend a book, The Body Keeps the Score. It's a big fat book. But quite honestly, that is what unlocked me understanding Tom. Like I read that book. It took me a while. It was difficult to read because it was like a mirror, both to myself. I have complex PTS from abusive childhood, from my own stuff. And so it was a mirror to me in many ways. So arm yourself. So when these things happen and you're like, what crazy shit show is happening in my home right now? You're like, oh yeah, I read about that. Oh yeah, I know. Because I think one of the hardest things that happens in this community is isolation. And that happens both to the spouse and to the warfighter of this shit feels crazy. Like, does anybody else feel this way? Nope, nope. Okay, just shove that in. Spouse is doing that too. Spouse is saying, I can't tell my parents like the crazy shit he just pulled last weekend because I have to go to Christmas dinner and sit down with everyone. So I just won't tell my friends. I just won't tell my family because this is crazy. They'll tell me to leave him. I don't know what to do. So yeah, I mean, that cycle exists for both. I don't know
I
if that,
feel no, 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 no. And a big one is the rate of injury and death that happens in training is
yes.
massive. Like we don't talk about that at all, and it's a legit thing. So keep that in mind, like just because someone hasn't deployed or hasn't gotten amongst it in that way, that it's not, they're not at risk. So that's something to remember. I'll I never asked you. Am I able to put this out as a recording afterwards for people to
Yeah,
watch?
for
Maybe I
sure.
shouldn't ask you on a webinar live like this. Okay,
No, that's
noted for
awesome.
next time. Happy you're cool with it. All right, moving on. Say you have childhood trauma and combat trauma. What kind of therapist should you look for?
That's a great question. I would recommend, so regular talk therapy typically does not work with PTS. They know that. Cognitive behavioral therapy, where you're looking to literally change the behavior that you don't like within the home, or emotionally focused therapy or EFT, typically are the two that are recommended most. But
Okay.
there are a ton of different modalities. I mean, if therapy isn't what you want to do, there's other ways you can start too.
There was just a really nice shout out from Kendall saying the happy that we're talking about this. So am I. The precursor, there's a saying that I can't remember, but it's something along the lines of like when you need something yesterday, same thing where it's like you don't put the work in, and then when you actually need it, it's like, damn, I should have been doing that at work the whole time. It's the same thing if you, especially if you're newer into the community or yeah, we'll just say the community, then yeah, definitely buffer up yourself. If you're a new operator, assaulter, whatever, read all the mental health books, read all this stuff. Like you don't know when you'll need it, and it won't be apparent to you until you're like in that moment, and then you're gonna, it's hopefully not going to be a crazy scramble to reach for something or reach for someone to give you that something, but it'll be more like, hey, I've been doing meditation, I've been doing proper this, we've been going to counseling, we've been taking care of each other. Um, okay, I got two more and then we'll let you go. I think we got long enough. How can spouses better communicate in a respectful way to their operator? Respectful, calm communication seems to de-escalate the situation.
Yeah,
How?
I
Yeah.
is that so basically how to like I'm assuming in moments of like anger or rage, how to de-escalate or kind of talk calmly because I did a dance, I mean, for years. I told Tom, he's like, if you would just talk to me this way when I'm raging, then I wouldn't do this. And then I would try that. And I'm like, that didn't work. Or, I mean, I've done everything from being quiet and getting small to literally going toe to toe with him and getting as big as I can, which I would never ever recommend. Like I've literally told women, like, do not try to go toe to toe with a highly trained operator because and I mean, even Tom has told me in times, he's like, you cannot ever come at me. He's like, my training is so incredibly specific and it's so ingrained into me. It's so muscle memory that he's like, I'm afraid I'll hurt you out of response. Not because I want to, but because that's how I'm so highly trained. That's what I do. When I feel rage, when I feel anger and you're attacking me, not anymore. This is like 10 years ago, Tom, but literally telling me, do not engage. Do not do that with me because I'm terrified I'm going to hurt you. So again, these plans have to be made in moments of complete calm when everybody's in a good mood, in a good space. And I wouldn't just like go, hey, hey, I want to talk about fighting. I would set up even a time. Hey, on Thursday night, the kids are going to go to bed at 7. Or maybe you're even tired by that time, or Sunday, hey, when they're out playing, like that might be a good time for us to talk about, when you get ragey and when you get angry, it's really scary to me. We need to figure out a way that we can de-escalate in that moment. Is it taking the pause that we talked about? Is it, hey, this is what I need from you? Because every single assaulter is different, and how they respond is very, very differently. You might have one guy that blows up and he gets really big and he's violent and he's throwing shit around the house. You might get another guy who gets in his car and he doesn't come home for 2 days. He's an avoider, he's an isolator. So for each person, that's going to be very different. But de-escalation is what Gottman talks about, what Johnson talks about. So learn your language, learn your style, learn your partners, and then work in it in the calm, and then have a professional help you with it. Because it's difficult. It's not easy. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, yeah, just read my book. And then,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, takes
The
practice.
calm, it reminds me of like a will. Like no one wants to do a will ever, but it's like it's really, really important. And it feels almost, I don't mean to bring it up like that, but it feels almost the same way where it's like that's such a good piece to incorporate it in your like family life, like a month checkup or a 6 month checkup, or
Right?
as a part of your relationship where you can go through and having that conversation. Such a good point. Um, we'll leave it off. We'll have one more question. Oh wait, 1 second. Okay, yes. Thanks, Johnny. Um, how how do you justify self-destructive behavior when you're hurting the ones you love? That's almost like, yeah, I'll just let you answer. Hear your
So,
voice.
you know what? Hurting the one you love is never okay. I don't think that was the point of the question of justifying that behavior, but how to maybe explain that behavior. Because I truly do believe this in my heart of hearts. I have met thousands of operators, thousands by now, first working for 4 years, now the last 7 years. And quite honestly, when we started All Secure Foundation, it was me on the phone, call after call after call after call. And I will tell you this, I would have guys tell me the most horrific fights that they had with their wives, where I literally was like, shit, like that's bad, and at the same time have that same guy in tears telling me, how do I stop this behavior? Why am I such a monster? Why can't I, turn it off? I truly do believe that even when the self-destructive and hurtful behavior is happening, it's not because you want it to. It's not because the operator wants to be a jerk or abusive or an asshole. That's what it might look like on the outside, and that's what's happening. But that person has been so highly trained to respond in the way that they do. I mean, quite honestly, they give you guys medals for violence. They give you awards for it. Nobody on the team is saying like, you hugged a terrorist today, good job. It's not the mentality. So to come home and there's a threat, and the threat is your spouse or your kid, and it doesn't sound logical, right? It just doesn't, because it's not. But that's the way that the injury has created this narrative in your head. And so you're trying to protect, you're trying to do all these things, but then it comes out the wrong way. And then you yell, or then you scream, or God forbid you put a hand on, and you're like, that's self-destructive behavior to someone I love, and I don't want to do that. I believe you that you don't want to do it. I believe that your training took you to a place to do it. You have to now retrain yourself. You have to step back and say, okay, for as many times as I went on the range and shot that freaking gun to be that good, I have to think about it. I have to train myself at home that many times over and over and over again to be that good, to be positive, to not be destructive. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a year. It's going to through constant reinforcement of changing behavioral patterns. And it just takes time, like super be patient with yourself. And if I could tell everyone, forgive yourself. Whatever it is you're holding on to, whatever that dark secret is in your closet, until you forgive yourself, you will have self-destructive behavior to yourself and others. Until you deal with that demon, that darkness, whatever it is for you, it will be self-destruction. So once you heal that, like Tom has, that behavior is gone. It's gone. Does he want to get some, like I just said before? Yeah. Every now and then something comes on the news and he's like, let me go.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
dude, you're 58, you're not going anywhere. But yeah, just be patient with yourselves, forgive yourselves, be diligent, work on it, and know like you guys both want to get back to good. You guys both want to have a great relationship. You love each other, you picked each other for a reason, and you could get back to good. War sucks. It creates some really freaking tough family dynamics and situations that frankly accountants don't have to deal with. So to the women here, like you are extremely resilient. I know you hate that. Like I do too. You're put in the situation, but that means that you're stronger, you're smarter, you're more competent, and it does get better. The more you work on this stuff, like Tom and I really are in our honeymoon phase now, and life is really good for us, but it's really difficult getting here, but it was worth it.
I'm so happy for you guys. You deserve it. It's such an amazing message that you spread. It's important that look at how many treatment modalities there are. You went to 34 of the 36 appointments. Not giving up is so important. I find a lot of veterans get caught up and they stop and don't stop. Just keep going. There's a new 24 every 24. There's a new 7 every 7. New month every month. New year every year. You get to rewrite your story every single day. And as Jen has explained, there's lots of different ways to figure it out. Special forces guys, special forces is you don't practice till you get it right. You practice until you can't get it wrong. It's going to be the same kind of thing with this stuff that she's talking about, that you put into practice every day. If you neglect it, the proof's in the pudding. And just like Jen said, it starts with you as the person, and if you want to get better. So there's no magic pill, there's no super sweet psychedelic that's just going to switch it off. It's going to still have to come from within. So if you want to donate any money to the All Secure Foundation, go to their website, type in All Secure Foundation, and they have a donating tab. If you're looking for further resources, you can either email me, you can probably contact the organization. Um, I can't thank you enough for coming on.
Thank you so
And
much. Really appreciate it.
sweet. I don't know how to end these things like properly. I feel like
I
I
know
should like
it's always
discuss it
awkward,
with the
isn't it?
person, but
Hey,
uh, I'm gonna end this now, guys. So thanks everyone for coming out. 2 weeks time, we got another webinar coming down the pipe. Thank you again, Jen. We really appreciate it.
thank you.
See you guys.